Imagine you're deep in the Appalachian woods past 1 a.m. and the entire forest suddenly goes silent. And then you hear it, a shaky, crackly voice following you at the exact same volume no matter how fast you run. And just 5 minutes later, a scream so violent it sends every bird exploding out of the trees. Tonight, 3 true stories just like that actually happened in Appalachia. Hi, I'm Aiksa. Welcome back. This happened maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I live in southern West Virginia, and I have for my entire life. The woods and the mountains surround every direction you look. Nighttime is a darkness that you can never dream of unless experienced. I was with my friend. I'll call him Mark. Mark was at my house one evening, doing the usual things, watching UFC and playing Xbox. It was extremely late when we finally got bored and decided to go out for a walk on a nearby trail to smoke. This is not particularly a long trail, but it is dense in the woods that surround it, and it is easy to get freaked out when you're thinking of your surroundings. We finally get about halfway into the trail, about 30 minutes in, where we stop and we stand on the trail to chill and talk. The forest is very alive tonight. There's always noises in the woods, but the amount of animal activity for the time was unsettling. At this point, it was probably past 1 a.m. This was strange and kind of eerie, but not alerting as to any sort of predatory animal in the area that may have caused a disturbance, and we continued on our walk. Then almost immediately, the forest falls dead silent. And as soon as the forest goes quiet, there's a voice, almost like a mocking, humanoid voice. It's shaky and uncertain, almost like an old children's toy, like the ones with the crackly speakers and robotic voice. This immediately sets us off. We bolt directly down the opposite length of the trail, but the sound does not gain distance. It doesn't get any closer per se, but no matter how far we ran down the trail, this eerie voice remains the same volume, going over and over, with no quieting or stopping. At this point, I'm convinced that we are in genuine danger, something I have felt very few times. Finally, after sprinting for who knows how long, we exit the trail, grasping for breath, and almost at the verge of tears for how frightening this was. We began to exit the trail, and about 5 minutes from the exit, there's a bone-shaking, heart-stopping, murderous scream from directly behind us. I know what a mountain lion sounds like. This was not an animal. This was not someone playing or watching a movie. This scream sent birds flying from nests and made my heart drop into my stomach. It was the most genuinely depraved and violent scream I have ever heard. This is a true story that I've only told to maybe 3 people, all of whom seem to brush it off as false. I've never been a person to push for the existence of the paranormal or spiritual, but I genuinely believed I encountered something inhuman in those woods. This is a second story. I was a kid when I had an experience in the Appalachian Mountains. I was around 10 years old, and my parents would take us to Macon Lake campgrounds to camp for the whole summer. The first night we were there and we had to set up camp, but by the time they came into the tent to sleep, they were passed out. We were sharing this big one tent, me, my parents, and my uncle. While I was laying there trying to fall asleep, suddenly I got an absolutely horrible feeling. It came completely out of nowhere, and I felt freezing cold and I completely panicked. Then I heard the sounds of twigs breaking. It panted slowly, approaching the tent. At this point, I am so scared that I'm paralyzed and I can't even speak. I didn't even want to make any noise to wake up my parents because I was so terrified this thing would try to come into the tent. This thing began walking around our tent. It was walking upright like a human with its body pushed up against the tent as it was circling around it, almost like it wanted me to see it. I was so scared for the first few hours, and it hadn't even registered in my mind that my uncle's window was unzipped so I could see through it when it walked by and actually get a look at it. I ended up looking at it as it passed by my uncle's window, and what I saw was not normal. This thing looked like a pale, emaciated humanoid monster. It didn't have hair on its head and its eyes were black. This thing circled around the tent all night until the sun came up and just left. I told my parents and my uncle about it this morning, freaking out and shaking. They didn't take me seriously, probably thought I just had a bad dream, but I know what a bad dream is. And I was up all night. I didn't sleep. I was just shivering in terror over this thing. I even was so exhausted, I slept all day. So I highly doubt that it was a bad dream because I clearly hadn't slept if I was tired enough to sleep the entire day away the next morning. This third story is by Ratch 1874. My uncle, my mom's brother, has had a farm in southeast West Virginia since the 70s, long before I came into this world. Mom is the oldest of 5, and my uncle built a bunch of houses on the farm so family could use it whenever. I always loved it because I have tons of cousins and was the baby for a long time, so I mostly tagged along with my cousins and felt extremely safe, like it was my happy place. I don't really remember anything totally out of the ordinary when I was really little. What I remember after age 5 was suddenly being old enough to not have someone walk me into from other houses, which I thought was so cool. So I used to explore. My uncles liked to bow hunt and had taken me a few times, not too far into the woods, so I was able to go back on my own and find their little tree platforms they built to hunt from. I thought they were cool little tree houses. It was winter and I wanted to be out in the snow and explore. So I found my way up to the mountain. That's what I called it, but in fact it was probably just a massive hill. I couldn't find the spot I was looking for and got pretty frustrated with my 8-year-old self, so I sat down by a creek to catch my breath and figure out where I was. I couldn't have been sitting for more than about 3 minutes when something let out a scream. I can only describe it as blood-curdling. I thought it was a fox most likely until I heard another voice crying, just weeping and wailing. The sorrow was palpable. My cousin has always told me scary stories, and I figured they had followed me into the woods and were trying to scare the pants off me. I called out like, "Okay guys, not funny. Okay, I'm going home, enough," and followed my footprints in the snow as fast as I could run back to the farm. The screaming and crying didn't stop. It stayed consistent as I moved, which really made me convinced that it had to be my cousins. I don't think I heard words, just crying and screaming, but it wasn't pleasant. I made my way back to the main house. I ran until I got to the kitchen door. I remember getting through the door and slamming it behind me because I was a combo of terrified and annoyed that my cousins were playing a prank on me. Well, wouldn't you know, every family member was accounted for in the living room. The older male cousins and my uncles were in the kitchen putting their snow boots and coats on to come look for me because apparently I'd been gone for several hours and they were worried. According to my mom, I was white-faced, my hands were covered in scratches. I guess I must have fallen or something. My mom said I looked like I seen a ghost. I asked if anyone had come out to the woods to look for me, and they said no. We've been looking at the different houses and we were about to come look for you because they saw my footprints heading out to the woods. I told them about where I went and what I had heard, and my uncles, whose property it was, said, I think you probably ran into the witch. I'm over here thinking some crazy lady lives in the woods and I probably stumbled near her cottage. No. The witch is just what they called the unknown entity that roamed the woods, screaming, crying, mimicking people's voices, and just giving people a good old sense of doom and dread. I've been back to the farm over the years, but I can tell you I've never set foot back in the woods again, even as an adult. I'm grateful my family didn't think I was crazy, but they said a general rule is to not be in the woods alone. If this story stuck with you, you can like this video and subscribe for more. If you've ever experienced anything like this, you can share it in the comments and I'll read your stories. Thank you and bye-bye.